Superboy. Sometimes he's an edgier and more interesting version of Superman, and sometimes he's just Superman, but weaker. Now that I've caught your interest with arguably the worst of the super family, let's get to the bottom of what Kon-El can really do. Hello and welcome to the show with issues. I'm Auram, and it's time for another Power Hour segment. It's been a while since I touched on anything DC related, so I figured I'd give the Superboy of New Earth the Power Hour treatment. And yes, I know I'm wearing a Marvel shirt. That being said, let's get started. Before we get into the core of what Superboy can do, let's talk about who he is and how he can actually do everything he can. Superboy was originally a nameless clone created by Project Cadmus. This was an effort to replace Superman after he died in the Big Death of Superman event. Cadmus used Kryptonian DNA combined with human DNA, using Superman and Lex Luthor as the bases. He was quickly aged and was being fed the information and knowledge he would need at his current age until he was broken out and freed by the Newsboy Legion. The Newsboy Legion was a rogue group of Cadmus agents. Superboy, now a young adult and a free man, traveled to Metropolis, where he began claiming to be Superman. At this point, he was under the impression that he was a clone of Superman and was starting to get full of himself because of this. Not many people believed him, needless to say, and began mocking him by calling him Superboy. Eventually, however, after the return of the real Superman, Superboy accepted his name. He moved to Hawaii and began to truly test his powers and make a name for himself. Now on to the kid's skill set, and I will say it's actually more interesting than Superman's. At least it started out being more interesting. Superboy, seeing as he was a Kryptonian human hybrid, didn't exactly have Kryptonian abilities. The powers he did have came in the form of tactile telekinesis. This was basically a force field surrounding his body that allowed him to do all kinds of things. The most basic of these were things like simulated super strength, super speed, super hearing, invulnerability, and even flight. All of these abilities were limited though, seeing as they're just being simulated by the force field and are not inherent. He did have some more unique powers as a result of the force field, however. For example, he could control the field and push it around or against things. He can also take this a step further and create blasts of psionic energy that are equal to around 5,000 pounds of explosives. The only real downside to the actual force field is that it cannot repel gases or energy attacks, only physical things. Another power that comes with his tactile telekinesis is his ability to disassemble things with a touch. Basically, this allowed him to quickly break things down to their core elements, depending on how far he wants to take it. One of the ways he uses this is to bombard people with particle attacks made up of sand and dust. I guess it's worth mentioning that his hands go blue when using this specific power. As Superboy progressed in his career and as a person, he began to develop his Kryptonian DNA. This allowed his true powers to manifest, not unlike Superman's. His Kryptonian DNA allowed him to feed off of the radiation of the sun, which in turn fuels his superpowers. The more radiation he accrues, the more powerful he becomes. This is another reason why he didn't initially have his Kryptonian powers, since he wasn't being exposed to the sun at Project Cadmus. Being a Kryptonian allowed him to have basic powers like super strength, super speed, super hearing, invulnerability, and flight, along with other more specific powers, not unlike the tactile telekinesis. One of these is heat vision, which allows him to fire concentrated blasts of heat at varying temperatures by looking at an area. He's also able to change the size of the affected area. Another one of his Kryptonian superpowers was enhanced vision, which came in many different types. Superboy is able to visualize the electromagnetic spectrum. This includes things like radio waves, transmitted frequencies, and stuff like that. He also has telescopic vision, which allows him to see far distances. It basically works like a zoom lens on a camera. Imagining his pupils dilating like a zooming lens is actually a pretty creepy image. Anyway, he also has X-ray vision, which allows him to see through things. He can also see specific layers of an object, like each system of the human body. The last two types of his enhanced vision are microscopic vision and infrared vision, which basically just allows him to see very small objects and see in the dark. It's also worth mentioning that before these powers manifested, Superboy used a visor to replicate Superman's enhanced vision created by Emil Hamilton. Superboy also has super breath, which allows him to inhale and exhale large amounts of air. He can also control the temperature of the air he exhales, which effectively gives him freeze breath. So at this point, Superboy is seeming pretty overpowered. He, of course, has his tactile telekinesis and his Kryptonian abilities. Oh, and I should mention that his tactile telekinesis does not go away when he uses his Kryptonian abilities. So, what can stop the Boy of Steel? Because of his Kryptonian DNA, he has a severe vulnerability to kryptonite, magic, and red sun radiation. The red sun radiation doesn't affect him as much as it should, though, seeing as he's not a purebred Kryptonian. Another one of his shortcomings is the limitation on his powers. Seeing as he hasn't absorbed as much solar radiation as Superman, Superboy has an inherent limit on how much he can use his powers. If he uses them too often all at once, his body could lose sustenance, causing it to feed on itself and eventually killing him. Sadly, DC doesn't have an official power grid, and I can't even find any fan ratings online, but one could imagine that he's a pretty powerful character. He's obviously weaker than Superman, though it's in the name. Anyway, if I missed any of Superboy's super niche powers, let me know in the comments. Also, just talk about his character in general. I was a big fan of the version of Superboy in the Young Justice cartoon, but doing research on the New Earth version has made me realize how lame the character seems. But that's just an opinion. This is probably the biggest week of August for me in retrospect. I'll be getting 8 titles, including 1872 issue 2, House of M issue 1, and Loki Agent of Asgard issue 17. It's been quite a while since I've picked up a new Secret Wars tie-in number 1, so that's exciting, and Agent of Asgard is coming to a close, so that's really sad. Mixed feelings aside, the rest of my pull list is in the description. But that's it for this week. I'm glad I was finally able to do another Power Hour segment. These tend to be shorter than normal, but what are you gonna do? Talk about all that Superboy stuff I said earlier in the comments. Thanks for watching as always. Next time I don't film on an empty stomach while also being up for around 24 hours. There's something wrong with me, guys.